Hello and welcome to another Time Traded Frontline recap. Now, I'm going to go through some videos this week to give you a recap. Of course, I'm Philip Ingram. I present Time Traded Frontline, but I also commentate on all matters geopolitical, defense, security, counterterrorism, and anything else that people ask me to or will pay me to as well. If anyone wants any commentary, I'm always there. Just cross my palm with silver and we'll get in there. But the important thing is to get into our recap. And the first thing I want you to have a little look at is the Russians are clearly worried because we've got the Kremlin spokesman saying that Foreign Minister Lavrov, where is Lavrov? More of which in a minute, is open to meeting the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Hungary. Have a look at this.
Regarding contacts between the heads of the Russian and US foreign affairs agencies following the Russian-American summit in Anchorage and the subsequent telephone conversation between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, there have been no further contacts. The heads of our country's foreign affairs services have reached an understanding on the need for regular communication. This is important for discussing the Ukrainian issue and advancing the bilateral agenda. These contacts will continue, and they will continue whenever necessary. At the same time, we confirm, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has also spoken about this in detail, that we remain ready to hold a second Russian-American summit in Budapest if it truly builds on the well-developed results of the Russian-American summit in Alaska. All details on this matter are, of course, the prerogative of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation. If NATO strategists do entertain such a crazy idea as to attack Russia, they should have no doubt that we will respond using every available means. The Russian leadership regularly states this. We, for our part, I believe we've grown tired of repeating, but will admittedly repeat again and again that we have no plans to attack NATO countries. At the same time, Russia is already taking all necessary measures to ensure security against the backdrop of this alliance's build-up of its forces near Russia's borders. In short, we are prepared for any development, while always proceeding from the primacy of peace, friendship, and equal cooperation.
К любому развитию событий, при этом всегда исходим из примата мира, дружбы и равноправного сотрудничества.
Now, the Kremlin starting to say that they're open for talks. This is a bit of a move forward, and this suggests that potentially Russia is worried. And this is something that is reflected in some of the commentary that we've got today. So let's get into the videos that we're recapping. The first two clips I'm going to point you at come from one big interview that we had, which was combined with Bill Browder, or I should say Sir William Browder, and Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is with him. And they were interviewed at the Magnitsky Awards together. But we've taken these clips separately because I think they've got important and valid points. The first one from Bill is talking about the Russian frozen assets and a targeting plan for the US to try and close off the Russian oil revenue.
Well, there's one other huge economic thing which could end the war. Everyone says to me, look, Russia's been sanctioned. They're still doing well. Sanctions aren't working. What do you have to say about that, Bill? You're the sanctions guy. And I say, yes, Russia's been sanctioned. They're causing great pain, for sure, no doubt. Most oligarchs are spending all day, every day on the phone with lawyers trying to figure out how to get out of their sanctions and all sorts of other problems. But there's one absolutely enormous loophole, which is oil. Russia sells hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of oil, crude oil. And the money that they get from that oil is what allows Vladimir Putin to continue this war. And so as long as they can do that, he can continue this war. And so then the question is, how do we stop him from getting money from the sale of oil? And it's actually very simple. It's remarkably simple. And people say, well, the buyers of that oil are China, India, and Turkey, which is true. But it's actually 2 oil refineries in China, 4 oil refineries in India, and 2 in Turkey. And so I've got a plan. And the plan is very simple, that the West, collectively, the United States, EU, UK, Japan, etc., go to those 8 oil refineries and say, here's the ultimatum. You have until January 1st to not buy another barrel of Russian oil. Up until then, you can figure out all your arrangements. After January 1st, if we find out that you've bought a single drop of Russian oil, directly or indirectly, you will no longer be allowed to do business with us. You can't sell to us, you can't buy from us, you can't insure with us, you can't trade, you can't do anything with us. If you're a Indian oil refinery, owned privately, this is not a state business, and you can either get some cheap Russian oil and then be cut off from the rest of the world, or not get cheap Russian oil and be able to do business with the rest of the world. I believe, and I think it's realistic to believe, that that refinery will stop buying Russian oil. And if these 8 refineries that buy, I think the number is $410 billion of money that was spent on Russian oil since the war began, if they stop buying that Russian oil, in 6 months' time, Putin would be on his knees economically, and he'd be begging for any type of end to this war.
You know, neither of you are short on determination, I can say that. And just interestingly about the whole talk that has been about the EU money, the money that the EU has been trying to provide in reparations loan to Ukraine, it's stalled at the moment, that 140 billion euros. And it's December that there will be another decision on that. Belgium blocked it. But there's this new idea that Norwegians have come up with that maybe they could actually provide their sovereign wealth to stump up 100 billion euros. That's a good workaround, isn't it?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Belgian problem will get solved. Belgium is saying to their European allies, all the money is in our country. If there's any legal problem, we don't want to be sitting by ourselves in court. It should be all of us together. It's totally a reasonable position. I'm certain that Germany and France and other countries will say, you know, you're right. Let's sign some type of agreement to say all for one, one for all, et cetera. And the reason why I'm so confident that this money will be transferred is because the world is running out of money. We're in a moment where people don't want to pay more taxes. Governments don't want to cut expenditures. Ukraine desperately needs the money in order to fight off the Russians. We don't want to put our own soldiers in harm's way because that's what will happen if Ukraine loses. And so there's an absolute financial imperative that money gets transferred, and I'm sure it will.
Now, of course, Bill goes on about how Europe needs to take the Russian frozen assets that are primarily in Belgian banks and sequestrate them and then give them to Ukraine to fund Ukraine's war. And that would have a massive psychological impact on Russia and financial impact on Ukraine's ability to buy more weapons from the United States and everything else. Donald Trump would be smiling all the way to his manufacturing bank, I think, if that happened. But the other thing that Bill came out with that I think is very interesting indeed is when talking about secondary sanctions that Donald Trump has said to go against China, India, and other countries that are buying Russian oil for refinement, and Turkey is amongst that. He says, actually, he doesn't need to go for full national sanctions. What America could do is bring the sanctions in against the refineries that are buying that oil. And he says there's only about 8 of them between those 3 countries. And if you hit those with sanctions for taking Russian oil and refining it, then that would have the same sort of impact, but without having on Russia's ability to continue to fund its illegal war with Ukraine. But it wouldn't have the impact on wider trade issues, and therefore that's something that he thinks they should continue. So, Donald Trump, if you're listening, Sir William Browder has given you a perfect idea that where you can have a step up before you go off to the sanctions against the countries. Please take on board exactly what he's saying. And then we get on to the next clip, which is with Vladimir Karamazov. Vladimir's talking about the potential meeting with Trump, or what was proposed by the Kremlin spokesman Lavrov meeting Rubio, leading to a potential Trump-Putin meeting and possibly Putin-Zelensky meeting in Hungary.
Look, this is nothing new. The West has been appeasing and enabling Vladimir Putin for 25 years, for as long as Putin has been in power, even though it was clear from the very beginning where this regime was going to go. Among his first actions in office, Putin shut down independent television channels. He rooted out the real opposition from parliament. He turned elections into meaningless procedures, turned parliament into a rubber stamp, and so on. He very quickly set out to establish a dictatorship. And all this time we saw, one American president, George W. Bush, look into Putin's eyes and see his soul. We saw another American president, Barack Obama, push the reset button with Putin. And by the way, when Bill and I were working to get the Magnitsky Act in the US, it was the Obama administration that opposed it because they had their reset going on with Putin. And we had the same problem on this side of the Atlantic. I mean, you remember the former Chancellor of Germany by the name of Gerhard Schröder, who basically just sold himself to Vladimir Putin in a very literal sense. So yes, it was absolutely shocking and disgusting for me, frankly, to see those images coming out of Anchorage in August of this year, where you had a murderer, an indicted war criminal with an active arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, walking down, the red carpet next to the President of the United States, being welcomed on American soil. But this is something we've had to deal with for years. And at the end of the day, change in Russia will come from Russia. It is only the people of Russia that can change this regime, and I have absolutely no doubt that they will come, and that Russia will be a normal, democratic European country.
I remember when we talked to you last year and you'd recently been released, there was a sense of a little bit of frustration that you were put on a plane without any choice where you were going, and actually I felt that you really wanted to stay in Russia and bring the change from within. And I know that you plan to go back one day and be ready. And right now you're ready to seize when that small window of opportunity comes for democracy and to establish that in Russia. What are you doing? How are you preparing for that?
And that's actually been another very important focus of my work, because we do know, and I'm a historian by education, we do know that major political changes in Russia usually happen like this, swiftly, suddenly, completely unexpectedly. Both the Tsarist regime in 1917 and the communist regime in 1991 fell in 3 days, literally speaking, and nobody saw it coming. And so many mistakes were committed back in the 1990s, both by Russia and by the West, that led us to where we are today. And so it is one of my overarching concerns now that we must not repeat those mistakes the next time there will be a window of opportunity for democratic change in Russia. Because, as I think the world has seen in the most horrible way over these past 3.5 years, what happens in Russia affects everyone. For as long as Russia is a dictatorship within, it is always going to be aggressive outside of its borders. So the only true guarantee of long-term peace and security in Europe is a democratic Russia, and that is what we should be working towards.
But what is the preparation?
There needs to be transitional justice. Once the Putin regime is gone, there will have to be full transparency and accountability for all the crimes that had been committed and still are being committed daily by this regime. This is something that never happened in the 90s with regard to the Soviet crimes. And here we are today, because when evil is not publicly reflected on and publicly condemned, it always returns. And the second mistake that was made in the 90s was that the West was not ready to help and assist and welcome that nascent democratic Russia as one of its own, to the family of Euro-Atlantic nations, in a way it was ready to welcome countries like Poland and the Czech Republic and the Baltic states. This will need to change too, because the only way Euro-Atlantic security, Russia's the largest country in Europe, the only way Euro-Atlantic security is really going to work is when Russia becomes a normal democratic country that will respect the rights and freedoms of its own people and that will abide by the civilized norms of international behavior. I have no doubt that this day will come, but I think it is important to be preparing now.
But he turns around and says nothing's changed, nothing's going to change, and he says that the Russians will be hoping that if there is a meeting like that again, it will reset the wider relationship, not just towards the end of the war, but the wider relationship between Russia and the international community, and would bring Russia back into the fold again. But Vladimir is quite clear that there's a long way to go before that happens, and he doesn't think that is even on the cards at the moment. But the very fact that he's discussing it and bringing that up makes him think that the Russians are misrepresenting their understanding of what is going on in the diplomacy side. So very interesting interview. Watch the 2 clips, but please go off and watch the whole interview that there was with my colleague Kate Jabot and Sir William Browder and Vladimir Kara-Murza. Fantastic interview. And then the final interview I want to point you at this week is one that I did with Dan Francis. Now, Dan is, a very, very experienced individual who's been assessing Russian diplomacy and what's going on long before the war with Ukraine started. And I'm talking about when it started in 2014. She is extremely experienced.
Poor Ukraine is still getting pulverized by this monster. And so as far as I'm concerned, the collapse can't happen too soon. On the other hand, it does, as we're talking, generate a whole new subset of problems.
Well, in the last sort of 24, 36 hours, the Kremlin news agency TASS, citing Alexei Ivanov, who's the Russian charge d'affaires in Turkey, has said that Russia is ready to continue direct negotiations with the Ukrainian side. you think this could be an indication that Putin recognizes that his position is becoming increasingly difficult and is now wanting to reach out and throw this olive branch out? Or is he just playing to Donald Trump to try and stop Donald Trump from coming down harder on Putin and more favorably for Zelensky and for Ukraine?
I think he's buying time again. Let's talk, then it'll take weeks, and then they'll talk, and then that'll take more weeks. And then he'll just walk away having given away nothing again. I don't think that Trump is going to fall for that again. And you said, why isn't Trump tougher? Let's not forget, we're dealing with, I think, an irrational man, Putin, and he has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. And so whatever is done has to be done with that eventuality or that possibility in mind. So that's his only advantage at this point, is that he could blow up Europe, maybe the world.
Other indicators that seem to be coming out of Moscow that all things may not be right is, Foreign Minister Lavrov seems to have gone very silent after he managed to derail the potential meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in Budapest. And now in the last 24 hours, I've seen some of his posts coming back up on social media, whether it's actually him or whether it's pre-recorded or whether it's something else. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think that if Lavrov has actually disappeared, that's a definite red flag, to excuse the pun, that the end of the regime is nigh. Yes, they're bosom buddies. It would appear, according to some of the things I read, that Putin is blaming Lavrov for not making a deal. Well, of course, when in actual fact, it's Putin who's not making the deal and Lavrov. Now, could be other reasons for Lavrov's disappearance. He may have fallen out of a window, or he may have fled. I mean, think about it. If you're in with Putin and you know that it's hopeless and he is getting more and more crazy, I don't think you go down with the ship. I think you find a safe harbor. I don't know. And he may pop up again. He may just have a cold. I don't know.
Yeah, there may be a medical problem with that, like when he had a few months back on, I can't remember where it was he was visiting. It was somewhere in Southeast Asia. And he disappeared for a few days because the rumors said he had had a heart attack of some description.
I think it's a tough job he has.
Yeah, well, yes, but he's such a wily old character, and he's probably this analogy is wrong, but as powerful as Putin, but in a different way. Putin is definitely the puppet master, but Lavrov is not quite the puppet. He seems to have a degree of control over the puppet master, if anything.
Yes, and he's like all the other ones around Putin. It's a mafia. He's got money salted away all over the world. His kids are millionaires many times over, and he will emerge from the wreckage. If he emerges from the wreckage, pretty much okay himself personally. Is he a successor? Is he the guy that's going to get rid of Julius Caesar? I don't think so. I think he's a nasty piece of work, and he's very devoted to Putin. But if he's disappeared, that would be significant.
That's something for us. In her interview, she's quite optimistic. I would assess overly optimistic that the war may finish next year. But what she majors on in this clip is a potential split between Lavrov and Putin. And it's interesting that I pointed you at the Lavrov the Kremlin spokesman saying Lavrov is open to a meeting with Rubio in Hungary. But Lavrov seems to have disappeared. And we speculate a little bit about where he's gone. He may have fallen out of favor with Putin because he failed to bring together Putin and Trump again in Budapest. But it could be for a number of reasons. It could be him falling out of favor, which usually ends up in falling out of windows, or it could be that Lavrov is ill. Remember, he reportedly had a heart attack when he was on a visit to Southeast Asia last year. So we just don't know. But I commend Diane's wider interview. It's absolutely brilliant, and I always love talking to her. And our final clip is European defence ministers promising another 150 million in euros in support for Ukraine.
As you know, Germany is also participating in the so-called PURL mechanism. This means that we are financing weapons systems that are only available in the United States from the prioritized Ukraine requirement list. These are systems that are only produced in the United States and which Ukraine urgently needs. Prominent examples are the Patriot systems and, above all, the missiles for them. Yesterday, we agreed at short notice to participate in another package here in Germany. I was in contact with Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, yesterday, and we agreed to participate in a further package worth at least 150 million euros. We are also making progress in this area. Germany delivered 2 new Patriot systems, 2 additional Patriot systems in October. It could have been even faster without the shutdown in the United States, where we needed approval.
Ukraine will need more funding next year. There are several options, but using immobilized Russian assets is the most clear-cut way to sustain Ukraine's defense. It is also the way to show Russia that time is not on their side. Supporting Ukraine is a bargain compared to the cost of Russia's victory. Wars are lost by whoever runs out of money or soldiers first. That is why we continue to apply pressure on Russia with sanctions. Work is going on the 20th package of sanctions, and sanctions clearly work better when they are matched by our international partners. The latest US sanctions are already depriving Russia of revenues that it uses to fund its war.
Ukraine is on the front line of a war of aggression imposed on it by Russia. From the very beginning, it has been able to count on European solidarity that is both constant and concrete. And President Emmanuel Macron will receive Mr. Zelensky in Paris on Monday, November 17th. Our goal is to compel Russia to return to the peace talks.
Notre objectif est de contraindre la Russie de revenir à la table des discussions de paix.
The threats against our nations and against Europe have only increased, with reckless drone incursions into Poland, Russian jets flying over Estonia, and NATO nations consulting through Article 4, not once but twice. Russian aggression is growing, the war in Ukraine continues to rage, and the US has rightly challenged European nations to do more and to spend more on defence.
Of course, this is just the latest package that is coming out of Europe. I have lost track of the number of packages that are coming out, but it shows that the cash flow and the flow of arms that are coming through Europe, and remember, Europe is now funding a lot of what's being bought from the United States, is flowing in. 150 million is slightly lower than a lot of nation states are giving, but that is from the EU, I think, itself, rather than bringing together what each of the different countries is doing, because we've seen support packages coming from Scandinavian countries and others mounting into the billions. But anyway, it's good to show that the support is still in Ukraine. So thank you for watching this week's recap. I'm Philip Ingram. Have a good weekend, and please sign up for Times Radio membership. That will give you exclusive access to our videos early and allow you to pose questions for me to answer in a Q&A. And of course, you can get us on all your favorite podcast channels. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.